Today's lecture is about Cold War television. The Cold War ran from 1947 to 1989. The Soviet Union consolidated power over its satellite states, also known as the Eastern Bloc, after World War II. We already know a little bit about the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, which ran from 47 to 54, and we saw the clips from Good Night and Good Luck in Unit 1. That also included the Red Scare, which drove a lot of that. A lot of people were paranoid, and I think I might have mentioned that one of the reasons, in my opinion, why the only two versions of Zone have worked, or the only two versions of Twilight Zone have worked, are the original, which ran 5 years in the late 50s, early 60s, and then the mid 80s revival, because we're still in the middle of the Cold War. We don't know, by the way, in the 80s that the Cold War was going to end. We basically outspent the Soviets. Uh, the Soviets tested their atomic bomb in 1949. President Truman counters by announcing work on a hydrogen bomb, a thermonuclear bomb, which was successfully tested in 1952. First major event was the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The North Koreans crossed over the 38th parallel into South Korea, and that was the first military conflict. In 1955, May, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact, that was basically their counter to NATO. It was a collective defense treaty with 7 Eastern Bloc countries. Then the thing that really freaked people out, October 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik, which was the first satellite. And the fact that you could see something in the skies, in outer space, that was not natural, put there by our enemies, freaked a lot of people out. In April 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, the first cosmonaut. Other key events. In April 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion fails. That was a big black eye for the CIA. In May 1961, President Kennedy gave his famous moonshot speech. I believe we should go to the moon. I believe we should go to the moon by the end of this decade. It's a great speech. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and that was probably the closest the world has come to nuclear war. If you've seen X-Men First Class, some of the bare bones of the Cuban Missile Crisis are in there. Obviously, we didn't have superheroes to help us resolve that. There's a really good docudrama called 13 Days, starring Kevin Costner and Stephen Culp as the Kennedy brothers. Sorry, not Kevin Costner's in it. It's Bruce Greenwood plays JFK. Kevin Costner's just an advisor to the president, and Stephen Culp, who recurred on JAG as our CIA officer, played Bobby Kennedy. In August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident happened. That was the pretext for the U.S. entering the Vietnam War. And then in February 1968, Walter Cronkite gave his report from Vietnam, concluding, "We are mired in stalemate." In March 1973, the last U.S. troops left Vietnam. In April 1975, the fall of Saigon happened. Then in December 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Uh, they couldn't figure out Afghanistan. The fact that we got mired in a war there and ended up having to leave was, again, a black eye for so many people throughout our politicians and the military. I mean, just if you read about Afghanistan, it's just the conditions for fighting over there are terrible, especially if you're not from that hemisphere. It's just we got mired there for way too long. And when we left, they said, the government was promising, oh, it's not going to be as bad as Saigon. Yeah, it was worse. In 1983, President Reagan proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative. It was nicknamed Star Wars to intercept missiles. George Lucas actually tried to, or he sued them to get them to stop using the nickname Star Wars and lost. Here's the thing, it didn't fully work, but The Russians didn't know that, so as I referred to before, we kind of outspent them into winning the Cold War because their economy went belly up. In February '86, Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the head of Russia or the Soviet Union back then, proposed glasnost and perestroika, and then in November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. And again, great moments in world history and American history. Uh, President Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," and yeah, it's a seminal moment. There are people who have pieces of the Berlin Wall. Berlin was split when basically one city became two halves. There was the Brandenburg Gate. Yeah, really crazy. And Germany itself was split in half, and so German reunification happened after the Cold War ended. Here are some of the TV shows that were affected. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which ran from 1964 to 1968. Robert Vaughn as Napoleon Solo, and David McCallum, who played Ducky on NCIS and just passed like within the last year or so, played Russian agent Ilya Kuryakin. Became a big heartthrob back then. They had a short-lived spin-off, The Girl from U.N.C.L.E., but it didn't last as long as the Mothership. Obviously, very influenced by the James Bond franchise. I Spy. We talked a little bit about this earlier this week. It ran from 1965 to 1968. It was groundbreaking. Robert Culp and Bill Cosby were the leads. This was groundbreaking because they're equals. Bill Cosby played, his cover was a tennis professional, but he was a spy. And cool show. This is one of the crazy shows that I loved as a kid. The Wild Wild West ran 5 seasons on CBS. Um, that's Robert Conrad as James West. He is a government agent. It kind of has a steampunk vibe before steampunk was really codified as a subgenre of science fiction. But it kind of like this science fiction western. It's hard to. And it had animated opening main title sequence. And then at each act break, something would happen and they'd freeze frame and then it would become basically a cartoon and they would refer back to the opening sequence. Kind of cool show. First season was in black and white, and the rest were in color. They made a really, really bad feature film adaptation with Will Smith and Kevin Kline, and Kenneth Branagh played the bad guy. Yeah, that I cannot disrecommend that highly enough. Another one of the unusual aspects, Get Smart was created by Mel Brooks, and it was a spy comedy spoof, and that is Don Adams as Agent 86 and Barbara Feldon as Agent 99. They eventually do fall in love and get married. There was a sequel series in the 90s with Andy Dick playing their son. It was terrible. There was also a feature film version with Steve Carell and Anne Hathaway as 86 and 99 respectively. That's decent. One of the biggest gags in the show is they had in the office they had the cone of silence, and they'd enter it, and then everybody could hear what was going on. It was this translucent cone. So, Mel Brooks is great with sight gags, and the dude's a living legend. I want to say he's around 97 now. I'd have to look that up to be sure. And finally, Mission Impossible, which ran from 1966 to 1973, kind of really epitomized the Cold War. It originally ran 7 seasons. It was a Desilu production, so it, like Star Trek, was championed by Lucille Ball. And then when Paramount Pictures bought Desilu, Star Trek and Mission Impossible became Paramount properties. Now CBS, Paramount Global owns everything. Both are very successful. Both became successful film franchises. There was a brief revival series in the late '80s with Peter Graves was still alive and still looked pretty much the same. He had a few more wrinkles than the original, and then Greg Morris' son Phil Morris played his character's son, which was kind of cool. He was basically the tech guy. I'm going to have you watch an episode of the show from one of the earlier seasons. It's available to stream for free on Pluto TV. You need to register for that, just like with the Perry Mason episode I wanted you to watch earlier this week. Or if you have a Paramount Plus subscription, you can watch it for free. But very formulaic. I mean, really formulaic. If you've seen like two episodes, you've pretty much seen them all. But just, you know, it was entertaining. I mean, it ran 7 years. It had good ratings, and basically, you have a team of mostly guys, and you have the attractive woman, so she can be a decoy and go undercover, etc., etc. Okie doke. Uh, Enjoy watching an episode of classic Mission Impossible.